Hello, everybody out there in TV land, and hello, everybody here too. I just thought I'd wave at the cameras. I love cameras. It's always good to get back. I have this little connection with the land. Any place where I've stayed for any length of time, I remember the lay of the land, and it's just right there with me. And so, of course, last year we got a chance to come down here and look around a little bit. This year we decided we'd look a couple different places, and so driving in, I remembered one place where I used to train horses, and this family had they were very much a part of my life when I was down here in Big Sandy. So I thought, I'll just swing by there and just show the girls. They've heard all my stories. I'm going to kind of show them that there is actually a basis of truth by pointing out that this is the place, and I can even point to different things. And we got there, we found the place, and boy, it's grown up. It's a lot different from yesterday when I was there. Ha. That's a joke. That's the way I remember my college years like they were yesterday, and I don't know what happened yesterday. Real yesterday. So anyway, that's just the way my brain works. But so I'm there, and I remember the entire place. I'm going, what happened? Where'd these trees come from? Anyway, so we couldn't see very much because the trees had all grown up around it so much that it was kind of hard. And we were just kind of drifting by, and we decided we weren't going to stop and knock on the door. The gates were all locked, closed, and I didn't want to disturb anybody. I didn't even really know if they still lived there, So we kind of drifted by and turned around, and on our way back, there's this lady getting her mail at that driveway. So I pulled up there and jumped out, and you remember me? And she did. So we all went in and we chatted and talked. So the interesting thing about this is we'd planned to be in this area several hours before we got here. And with traffic and time, and we're talking 2,000-mile difference, that it just worked out. We got here when we did. We just pulled off the highway on the way to Wynn's place, and there they were. But she hadn't planned on being home yet. She had planned more stops on her day, but that had gotten changed, so she just decided to come on home. And in a literally less than a 10-minute window of time, we ran into each other. Now, some people would call that coincidence. Some might call it serendipity. I call it something else entirely. I call it timing. God's timing. See, if we had set the cruise control 1 mile an hour faster, we wouldn't have been there. Or 1 mile an hour slower, we wouldn't have been there. If she had decided to stop for 1 cup of coffee, she wouldn't have been there. That's how short that period of time was. And yet, there they were. And we needed that. She needed that. We needed that. We needed a chance to get together, and the girls needed to hear some of the stories from someone else's mouth. They have a hard time knowing when I'm telling the truth or not. That's not that I lie. It's just, the tales get bigger with time. It's like the fish that you caught every time you tell it, right? So anyway, they got a chance to meet somebody who was important to me. So it kind of fit right into the sermon, because I was thinking, does anybody out here know who invented time? You look back in the years, it's interesting very much so, that I have an anthropologist daughter, and we have a lot of talking things about history. We talk a lot about archaic things. And anyway, so we talk about history a lot. But you realize that the oldest clocks that people know of, that anthropologists and historians have found, are about 6,000 years old. And they were found in the Egyptian region, and they're sundials. Everybody knows what a sundial is, right? The sun shines down on it, and it casts a shadow. And y'all have sunshine here right now. I'm used to clouds and stuff. Oh, I wanted to tell you that I appreciated the cool weather. But the humidity is a little bit different. See, up there we got it hotter, but it's a dry heat, right? So you don't notice it as much. You're just dying out in it. Well, here it's a little cooler, so that's nice. But anyway, so I appreciate y'all bringing in cooler weather for me. You could do something about the humidity next time. That'd be great too, but the cool weather is nice. So anyway, in Egypt, out there in the desert, they had a lot of sun, so they built these sundials. Have you ever seen the giant obelisks? They have the pyramids, but they have these obelisks, these tall things that look like the Washington Monument. See, they took a picture of the Washington Monument, and then they went back and built these things. right? Anyway, so smile at least, even if you don't get it. Okay, so they have these, and that's what those obelisks were for. And they'd pave an area around them, and they'd mark it off. And it was through that they discovered midday, because the shortest shadow, where the sun's overhead, prime meridian. They discovered the fact of they divided the day into two 12-hour periods with those obelisks. There's a lot of things. They discovered the summer and winter solstice. All of this through the movement of the sun on these sundials. In about 2000 BC, that's where in Samaria, that's where some of the historians have discovered that they separated the two 12-hour days. Then you go on, and I guess way back then they had candles. They used candles for timing. They used sticks, hourglasses. All these things have been found 4,000 or 5,000 years old. But then Plato created the first. I think it says Plato. It might say Pluto, but that wouldn't be right. That's a little dog, right? Anyway, so Plato created, it was late when I was writing it. He created a first water-powered alarm clock. It took up an entire room and the stream from a mill, but it worked. Then in Prague in 1525, Jacob Zech made the first mechanical analog movement. It again took up an entire room, but miniaturization is the wave of the future, right? Peter Heinlein in Germany in 1511, he developed the first spring-driven clock. He couldn't wear it on your wrist, but he developed it. Interestingly enough, here in America, Benjamin Banneker, he was a son of slaves in the 1750s. He was a really good wood carver. And he had just talented from birth. Well, probably from when he was old enough to hold a knife. But anyway, he was really talented. And he'd seen somebody's clock. He took it apart to try to fix it. And when he did, he saw all the little movements, and he carved all those out of wood, made his own working clock. And it ran true for decades. That's how precise he got these wooden movements. That was in 1750. So, things have been used for time. Since time began, people have been out there trying to figure out how to tell what time of day it is, how long the day has been, how long the week is. Everybody knows how long the week is. When you got a vacation, it's this long, and when you got to work, it's this long. I mean, that's just the way it goes, right? But who put the first stick in the ground? That first sundial. Who stuck that in the ground? Who invented time? Does anybody know? I do. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. Know how we tell time? Time in scientific measurement and in our daily lives is measured in two different ways. One of two ways. The first way, the most common way, is the movement of the earth around the sun. That's how all time is based. The second way is the speed of light. It's 3 times 10 to the 8th meters per second, or 186,000 miles per second. You know how fast that is? If you could go the speed of light, you could go around the globe 7.5 times every second. It's pretty fast, huh? But anyway, we use that for all different things. And large, we have an engineer that goes to church with us, and he was explaining that in the large factories where he works, setting up, he works for Siemens and does different things for them. But anyway, in the large factories where they're trying to trace wiring, they use the speed of light to trace wiring. It's part of their calculations. Because they can tell how long a wire is by how long it takes for whatever their photon or whatever they send to get one end to the other based on the speed of light. So it's used for measurement all the time. It's time measurement. But the most common time measurement is the movement of the earth around the sun. So who invented time? See here in Genesis 1, verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and earth. Verse 2, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Then God said, verse 3, let there be light. And there was light. There's an interesting thing here. God said, let there be light, and so there was. Whose light was it? The sun and the moon weren't created until the fourth day. I had some former church members, I don't know where they've gone now, they were getting to the point where the Bible didn't mean much to them. They were laughing at this, saying it can't be true because there was light on the first day and the sun wasn't created until the fourth day. And I was looking at them going, where was God in all this, in your calculations here? The light was God's light. You guys remember Revelation 21 and 22, the holy city? There will be no need for light, no need for day or night, because God will be there. His light will shine and fill it. The sun and the moon won't be necessary anymore. God's light. He shone. And then He separated light and darkness. And what did He call it? Evening and morning. Everybody, evening and morning. Those are two easy words. He called it day and night, didn't He? So, who invented time? God invented time. He's the first one to tell the day from the night. And then He said, and this is the first day. So He's the first one to invent the calendar. And He did it with His glory. And then you go on down to verses 14 through 19, and you read about the fourth day, how God created the stars and the moon and the sun, the lesser lights and the greater lights. God said, let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night. And then He told us why He invented time. You realize God did not invent time just so we'd know how old Wynn was? Or how old I am? I'm 31, by the way. My kids don't believe me. My oldest says, you had to be 8 years old when I was born. Anyway. He didn't give us time just so we'd know what time of day it is. God did not create time so we could sit here and look at the clock and say, boy, this guy's long-winded. That is not why He made time. Why did God create time? He did it for us. The entire world was made for us. God planned this all out. That's why He put everything we needed on there first before He brought us in. Everything but one thing. But He set up, and we'll get to that later, but He set up time for us. And He said it's for this. Into verse 14. Let them be for signs and seasons, for days and years. And you know that signs, when we talk about signs, everybody says, they were asking Jesus, what's the sign of your coming? You know, everybody's talking about signs. Well, God said they're the signs right there in the heavens. And if you read about the end of the days when the moon and the stars will be darkened, the sun and the moon will be darkened, there's a sign for us. You'll know the end of days has come when all that's dark. He put it there for signs, but for seasons. You know that word is moed? Moedim. You know where else that word is used? Leviticus 23. Anybody know what Leviticus 23 talks about? The Moedim. The seasons. The feasts of the Lord. He put those in the sky so we could tell when His holy days were coming up. When those things that were important to Him were coming up. God gave us time for a specific reason. You want to know what that reason is? Here's interesting. I always love the book of Job. And Job went through so much. You know, he started out a righteous man, right? That's what it says, the very first, verse 8 or something, that Job was a righteous man. But he ended realizing where he'd gone wrong. And, you know, we have the opportunity when we read the book of Job to live through what he lived without actually having to live through what he lived. To learn his lesson without having to actually be there. So if you go back to Job chapter 38, and God is talking to Job. He's let Job talk all this time, just talk and talk and talk. And Job's friends and his wife and all this stuff going on. And then God finally comes in. And you know what he says? He starts out by saying in verse 2, "Who is this who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Now prepare yourself like a man." He says, "Man up, buddy, because I'm going to tell you something, and afterwards you're going to answer some questions." So he says, "I will question you, and you will answer me." Okay, so then he goes along, he starts doing this, where were you when I did this and that and the other thing? verses 12 through 15. Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Have you caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take hold of the ends of the earth? Have you made it so the light comes out and the wicked's deeds will be shown in daylight? You know why thieves love the night? It's harder to see their wicked deeds. God created the day so it's easy to see. From the wicked their light is withheld, the high arm is broken down. But God created the light for certain reasons, and he's telling Job about this. He's telling, and we'll get to it, because he's kind of easing into it. Verse 19 through 21. Where is the way to the dwelling of light? Where is the way to darkness? Where is its place, that you may take it to its territory, that you may know the paths to its home? Do you know it because you were born then, or because the number of your days is so great? Say, are you so great that you know all these things? Where is all this stuff? You know, where did the sun come from? Where did the moon come from? We've been to the moon. Some people don't believe that, but, you know, one way or the other, whatever you believe, we've either been to the moon or a sound stage somewhere. But anyhow, there's the moon, you know. We have never been to the sun. It would be a little hot to land there. It'd be hotter than this. So we don't go to the sun. But the thing is, even so, how many people know where it came from? How much argument is there out there in the scientific community where this all came from? You've got a lot of perhapses and maybes when you listen to scientists talking about where everything came from. And that's what he's telling Job. Do you know any of this stuff? Is it because you're so wise that you know any of this? He goes on and he says, verses 31 through 33, can you bind the cluster of the Pleiades? Or can you take Orion's belt off? Can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season, or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? I love the night. I'm a desert man, and the nighttime is just beautiful for me. And I can tell time by the placement of the Big Dipper, of the Ursa Major, the Great Bear, and by Orion. And I know, not down to the second or anything, but I know roughly what time of night it is just from where they're at, because I've been out at night so often. But it's incredible. I can tell time by them, but you know what? I can't move them. I cannot change anything. I can see them. I can appreciate God's awesomeness, but I can't change a thing. What is he telling Job here? Do you know the ordinances of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? Can you do any of this stuff? And the fact is, no. God put all of that stuff there not so I could look at myself, not so I could feel so great and so wonderful, but so I could look at him, so I could see how great and how wonderful he is, so I could tell his time. He didn't put it there for my time. Talking about Mr. Hinton and how they said he'd had 10 years to go, and then he didn't. Why? Because we don't control our time. Time is just there for us. God didn't give it to us so we could control it, so we could do anything with it. He gave it to us so we could see him. He gave us time so we could see his seasons. You know, the importance of the holy days isn't so you have another day off from work and you have to go sit in church and listen to some long-winded guy talk. That's not the importance of the holy days. The importance of the holy days are to come to know him, to come to know the Lord of the holy days, the one who says, these are my feasts. And by keeping them, we draw closer and closer to him. But we wouldn't know where they were. You read Leviticus 23 and you see how specific he is on what day each of these things happen. He couldn't be that way if he hadn't created time to begin with. Why do you think he created time? So we would know. It's wonderful. It's neat. It's incredible. You go back and you see some of the other things that mean so much. Time. I'm kind of laying it out how important time is to God, but then I'm going to go and say time doesn't matter. But first, let's go and look at this here. Exodus 10. Okay, starting in Exodus chapter 8, what happens? Israel's been in Egypt for 430 some years, about 430 years. What, 15 generations, whatever? They've been living there. They've forgotten their God. They've been surrounded by all of Egypt's gods. And God sent Moses to tell Pharaoh, let my people go. And Pharaoh said, no, I ain't getting rid of my workforce. So God sent plagues. But what did the plagues attack? They attacked Egypt's gods. Each and every one of them attacked Egypt's gods. Not for Egypt's sake, but for Israel's sake. Because he was leading up to something very important that Israel needed to know. And so you go to chapter 10 and you read about the 9th plague. And what was the 9th plague? Their biggest god, the sun. And God caused darkness to fall for 3 days over the land. For 3 days, total darkness. Their candles did not work. They flicked their Bic, and there might have been heat, but there was no light. They had no light, and it was so thick, they could feel it. Palpable light. Palpable darkness. They had no light. Palpable darkness. Except in the dwellings of the Israelites. Their candles worked. But the Egyptians had no light. God took away their biggest god. And then, of course, the next plague, he took away their last god remaining, their Pharaoh, all the firstborn. We're assuming the Pharaoh was a firstborn. That's the way it worked. And his heir would have been a firstborn. And all the firstborn were taken. So God took everything from Egypt to show Israel what? What does it say there in Exodus 20, verse 1? I am the Lord your God. Sorry about that. Wake everybody up out there. That's what he said. He took away all of these gods that that Israel had been surrounded by in Egypt. He took them all away. He made them nothing. And then he said, I am the Lord your God. He gives us time for the same reason. That we might look and see that he is the Lord our God. Not your wristwatch, not your boss, not that time clock, the punch thing. That's not your God. He's God. So while all these other things we use as tools, they're not to be our God. He is. And that's the reason he created time. Joshua 10. Remember what happened in Joshua 10? Verse 12, he talks about it, that the sun stood still. I'm not going to turn to all these because I got too much to say. For Joshua's sake, God made the sun stand still for an entire day. Do you know what that means? Does everybody know how it works, right? The earth turns around the sun, right? So the sun isn't moving. So when the sun stands still, what does that mean? The earth does not move this way or this way. It stops. So God stopped the earth. Now the earth is spinning a little over 1,000 miles an hour. Now if you're on a car, okay, so coming in here, I got to tell you this, we hit a stoplight. And I'm used to yellows that go yellow and then red, right? So we're on 271 coming in. Wind went through it and it turned yellow underneath him. And I was like, oh, it's yellow. And everything in the back of the truck went up into the cab. Because at 65, it's really hard to stop in 30 feet, Well, then I sat there on a yellow light going, oh, now it's red. Oh, well. So anyhow, that's a 65, right? Or 55, whatever speed limit is there. Everything comes running up. So if you're going 1,000 miles an hour and you just stop, what happens? You're going to fall. But nobody did. This is how great our God is. He stopped the earth and no one noticed. They thought the sun quit moving. Isn't that something? God is huge. What did he use time for there? So Israel could win its battle, of course, but he used time for something else. So we could know him. In Isaiah 38, verse 8, mentions what happens there in 2 Kings 20, verse 11. You can read it. Where Hezekiah needed a sign. And so Isaiah said, okay, I'll give you a sign, or God will give you a sign. Which way do you want the sun to turn? Which way do you want the shadow on your sundial to go? 10 degrees forward or 10 degrees back? And Hezekiah says, hey, it's no trick to make it go 10 degrees forward. I don't know where he's been, but that would be hard for me. But he says, 10 degrees backward, now that would be something. So Isaiah called out to God, and God said, Erch! Okay, this is worse, okay? Because now not only is the earth, you're driving like this, now you're going backward. Everybody would have been flung off and we'd have civilization on Mars. But it didn't happen that way. Nobody noticed except the shadow went backward 10 degrees. Who controls time? Does anybody have a clue by now? Okay, so we know who invented time. God invented time. Now we know who controls time. God controls time. And there's a point to all of this. And the point is that time is made for us to look to Him. And I said I'd get to it. I'm kind of outrunning my notes here, but Genesis chapter 2, you go back to that. See, God created everything man needed before He put man on earth, everything but one. He created the seventh day. He had everything done by the sixth day, so then He made the Sabbath. You know who He made it for? Was it for Him? So He could take a breather? What's it say there in Mark chapter 2 when everybody was getting on to Jesus about what He was doing on the Sabbath day in 27-28? He said, look, you guys, the Sabbath was made for you. God made the Sabbath for us. And He made it as a gift. You know, all that other stuff He gave us ahead of time so we'd have stuff we needed. Then He gave us the greatest gift of all at the end. He gave us time. Not the time to tell, the clocks and the earth spinning and all that, which He gave us on day 4. He gave us extra time, spare time, rest time. He gave us time where we stop all that stuff during the week and we just sit back and we have time with Him. You realize that's what every millionaire and billionaire is looking for in these days? From the time, from way back when everybody started getting rich, what is the one thing they couldn't get more of? Time. So they're out trying to invent time machines, and they're out trying to invent cryogenic storage so they can die and come back sometime at a later date. They're trying to invent extra time. So you got Ponce de Leon looking for the fountain of youth. You got all this stuff. Everybody looking for more time. And God said, I gave it to you on the Sabbath day. Something I talked about in another sermon one time. We're the richest people in the world because we have what all the rich people can't find. Eternity. We've already got that. We never had to buy it. But He gave us time. It's important. So what does all mean? This all means that time doesn't belong to me. It means that time's not mine to stop. It's not mine to start. It's not mine to fill with at all. It means time belongs to God. Which means that God's timing is the most important timing of all. We sit around and we plan things. When we try to plan them nowadays, we have calendars on our phone that can go down to the minute. We plan everything, trying to make it just all work together and fit. But God said, look, I control time. Time is for you to look to me. That's what God says. And if we would back off for a minute and take ourselves out of the equation a little bit and say, God, we will leave it to you and do things in your timing, what could have been avoided? All these, I don't know, just think about it in your life. Think about it in the life of the church. Think about it, all these things. What could have been avoided if we had sat back and let God do things in His time? God's timing. And this has come to Diane and I, our attention here recently. And some things, I'll mention a few of them. Some of them are very personal, where we have had things that have happened and we've said, how are we going to do this? How are we going to get through this? And we've made the decision at first, somewhat reluctantly for me, because I'm a go-getter. Okay, this has got to be done. I'm going to go do it. And I'm going to get it done. And so it was kind of reluctantly for me a little bit for Diane to tell me, just wait on God. And so the first time, maybe the second time, I was a little reluctant. After that, that's become our new mantra this year. Wait on God. If you got a question, just stop. Just put it in God's hands and wait, because He will plan it out better than anything we could ever do. So I'm sitting here with this sermon. I thought I'd kind of end it up a little bit here with a few of the stories of how God's timing has worked, just so that you can, because I know all you are going to have stories of your own, but some of them you may not even realize, because I didn't. When I started writing this down, I started, oh, wait a minute. Now this actually happened instead of not last month or the month before, but it actually started a few months before that. But wait a minute, now that started a few months before that, and I started sitting down there and started thinking, where did this start? I'm not going to bore you about my birth, but I got back all the way to college at AC. I didn't want to go. I had plans. I had things I was going to do. And I knew exactly what my life was going to be like. But Mom and Dad wanted me to go. They wanted somebody in their family to go to college, and they wanted me to go to Ambassador. I don't want to go to Bible school. What do I want to do with that? I don't want that. I want something else in my life. But I went. Now, the interesting thing about this is I didn't have enough money, okay? Ambassador had this thing they sent out, you have to have a certain amount of money to come. And I didn't have enough. Of all the work that I had done and all the hay bales I'd bucked, we don't make much up there. And of course I had to buy my truck, and that's important too, right? So, so I didn't have much money. And then I applied for Pasadena, and they didn't accept me, and I was like, woohoo, yeah, all right, I don't have to go. And then I got this thing from Big Sandy that said, provisionally accepted here. And I was like, provisionally means maybe I don't have to go, woo! And then it said, I didn't have enough money, is what it said. I had to have a certain amount, and I didn't have enough, and woohoo! And then this guy, Jim Cassee, I don't know if you know him, wonderful, wonderful man. He wrote me a letter. He said, Wade, come to school. You need to be here. And it doesn't matter that you don't have enough money. He had something to do with the money side of things, the finance in there. He said, we will make it work. I had enough money to buy a one-way ticket, plane ticket, and I had $800 left over. And that was going to feed me, clothe me. That was going to do everything, including pay for my college, right? I get down here, and we're going through this registration line. We get up to the point where you got to write the check, and I'm like, there's zeros on that number. I don't have those. And they said, well, you can't be here. I said, well, I got a letter from Mr. Cassee. And so they said, oh, well, I guess you can, So here I am on financial probation. Of course, 4 years later, I left, and they wrote me a check, because I'm always a go-getter. I couldn't sit still. But the thing is, I didn't want to be there. And every excuse that came up, I was going to take it. But God wanted me there. So every excuse I had, He put something in the way of it. He fixed it. So I had no excuses at all. So I ended up at AC. You know what I got out of that? I got my beautiful wife, my beautiful daughters. I got things I would never have had if I'd have gone my way. I got to be here, which I probably wouldn't have been if I'd have gone my way. Romans 8:28, it's already been mentioned in the opening prayer, but all things work together for good to those who, I like to say, trust God and are called for His purpose. I mean, I didn't really trust Him at first, but He had a purpose for me. And He was making it work. And so, that first year was pretty rough on me. And then you heard the song. I kind of started Started realizing things. And then Diane fell hard for me. Somebody asked us while we were counseling for marriage, what struck you about Wade? And she goes, a fence post. There was this accident that I was somewhat guilty of causing. It was a horse-related thing, and I was managing the horses. And she ended up in the hospital for a week or two instead of Vail for the ski trip. And I hadn't really, noticed her that much. There were a lot of girls, and I was noticing every one of them. So I'd noticed her, but not that much yet, but I felt so guilty. So I started going to the hospital, and one of the faculty gave me a car so I could do that every day. And I don't know, somewhere in there, I suddenly realized I didn't want that to end, so got to know her. She was captive because she couldn't move. So anyway, God works in so many awesome ways. Psalm 37, verses 7 and 8, and verse 34. Rest in the Lord and wait patiently for Him. Cease from anger and forsake wrath. Do not fret, it only causes harm. Wait on the Lord and keep His way, and He shall exalt you. When you learn to give things to God's timing, things work out. So I came back home after college, and I had this job all worked out for me, and it fell through, and I was just struggling trying to find work to keep the family fed. And Diane was able to find work right away, and she always has been, so we've been blessed that way, and being able to live off her paycheck when I couldn't find work. But my dad had a cabinet shop, which I swore I'd never enter, because I worked for him before college, and I was like, no way, that's not mine, that's his. And he had full-time employees and all, and he didn't really need my help, but I needed work because I was just looking everywhere I could, day labor and all that stuff, driving the school bus. So Dad gave me a part-time job, and then all his full-timers quit. And guess what? I had a full-time job doing something I really didn't want to do. So then a couple years later, it hadn't been long, somebody noticed my grades and everything, my degree, and I was actually headhunted from a large major finance company. They came out to the shop to see me and asked if I would want to take their little test to see if I could qualify to be employed by them. I took the test and sat down in an interview, and he said, what we want to do is we want to open an office and we want you to manage it. And they offered me big bucks and commissions and all this stuff. And I said, finally, I get to do something I want to do. I love numbers. I love math. I love finance. And that's what I went to school for. And God's finally working it out for me that I get to do something I really want to do. So I went back and I told Dad and Mom, I'm quitting. I'm going to go do this. And they said, no, please, no. They said, give us 5 years. 5 years and you can do anything you want to. In 5 years, we'll know whether this is going to go, whether we can hire more people, blah, blah, blah. We ended up hiring, I think we had 15 people over the years working for us at one point in our shop. And we had 2 locations running, and I was there for 20 years. And never did get to do what I wanted to do. And we'd expanded too fast and realized it, so we kind of backed off a little bit, and then this and that happened, and the economy tanked. But right before it did, we could kind of see, I don't know if Dad saw the writing on the wall or what, but he sold our assets, our real assets in town. And so he's got a nest egg for his retirement and everything, and we went back to working at the old shop, just back to one location, and timing was perfect, because as soon as he did, everything, that was 2008. And it was a spigot shut off in 2009. It was just Thanksgiving of 2008. We were at Thanksgiving, and Dad called and said, don't hurry home. We don't have any jobs anymore. And that was it. From then on, I think we've made as much in the last 8 years as we made that year. Maybe not quite as much. The spigot shut off. But you know what? It didn't matter, because we already owned all the other shop. We owned the shop that we were in. And it was just him and me. And we thought we were being cursed when all our employees found other things to go do. And We were struggling trying to find someone to take their place, and it turns out we weren't being cursed at all. God blessed it, made it work for us. His timing. And that's what he does when we look to him. And if I hadn't stayed there, if I had gone with that major company, I don't know, I might be on my third wife by now. You know, I know people who've followed the money and that's been their God, and who knows where I'd be. Instead of having this opportunity to work for 20 years with my dad, to have his wisdom and his guidance, we'll be working along on a project and we'll stop, pick up the Bible and start talking about something. We again play. I remember we were working on a bank in town. We were working after hours because it was a bank, and we were doing stuff in there at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, whatever. And we had a tape playing from one of the church tapes playing, and we were discussing that as we worked through it. This has been my life these last 20 years, and I wouldn't have had that if I'd have been chasing the dollars. So God worked it out. He gave me exactly what I needed, and I didn't even know it at the time. So this is how he works. And then recently, my wife has gone through, she lost her parents. She lost her dad 10 years ago, and she lost her mom in March. And it's been hard on her. But we found out that Mom had cancer last year, just before the feast. And we have the Feast of McCall that Wynn was mentioning, and we're all busy. We can't get away. And Mom really wanted to spend the feast with us, and it just didn't work out that we could get away, but it worked out that Diane could, because the girls took over her responsibilities there. And so Diane went and spent the feast with her mom, and it was perfect, because Mom was feeling fine, feeling good. They spent time together. They were able to walk. They were able to go to all the services, all the Bible studies, everything they wanted to do. They spent so much time together, and we had no idea that the timing was perfect, that it'd be just a few months later that she'd be gone. And so God worked that out, and we didn't know. We had no idea. You're going to make me start. Anyway. So then, Mom was still feeling good in February. She went out and bought a new car, and she decided she wanted to give us the old one. So we go, okay, well, finances are so very, very tight with me not making any money, just living off of what she makes. So we figured out we could do it. We could buy 2 plane tickets one way so that Diane and one of the girls could go down and pick up the car and drive it home on spring break. So Rosie's spring break, we planned that out, and that was the 3rd week of March. And this is in February, and everything's gung-ho, and all of a sudden, just Mom went downhill. And one day, Diane called from work. She said, I got to go down there. I can't wait for spring break. So I said, okay, go. We'll figure it out. And so, with no money at all, and a credit card that was about this close to maxed out, I bought a plane ticket. I had enough to do that. And she went down there, and she was there 4 days, 3 days before Mom died. They got to spend a weekend together, her and her brother and her mom. First time in decades the 3 of them had been together. But God worked it out, and I got a check from a source that I wasn't expecting, but I had earned. It was a refund check that covered almost to the penny the cost of her going down there early, after the fact, because we put it in God's hands. We prayed about it, said go, this needs to be done, and there it was. So the whole point along this way is, you know what, when you stop and you put things in God's hands, and at that point we still weren't thinking that way. We were just trying to do things, and the things that we couldn't do, we were praying about, and God was making them happen. And since then, there have been so many things. I'm not going to bore you with them all, the technical details. So many things where we've stopped and we said, okay, we don't know what we're going to do here, how we're going to deal with this. And Diane, like I said earlier, she said, well, wait, and just leave it to God. And so I'd reluctantly wait, because I'm going to go out there and fix things. So I reluctantly waited, and what happened was something I would never have guessed, would happen, and it was best. It was perfect. I might have come up with some good solutions, but God came up with a perfect solution. And then it happened again and again and again and again. So that's become our mantra. We put this trip in God's hands. However it's going to work out, this is what's going to happen. And how to work out? We got to see an old friend we haven't seen for 20 some odd years. Because God worked it out for us to be there in that little 10-minute window. Over 2,000 miles in 3 days of driving. He worked it out down to that minute. That's how He works. And that's what I'm here to tell you today is you can trust Him. You can put your faith in Him because God created time. He controls time. And He has made it so that we can learn to look to Him. And when we learn to look to Him in everything, every day, including our time, He will work everything out. It won't always be sunshine and roses. Sometimes there's sadness and loss. But you know what? He worked that out. Mom didn't suffer at all. I've had people who've, friends in my life and family that have had cancer that have they've lingered in suffering and pain for years. She had none of that. She went with a smile. And it was perfect for her because she had her family with her. Everything was perfect. And the reason is because we have all of eternity ahead of us. God has given us all this time. We need to step back and just look and say, you know what, God, you gave it to us. It belongs to you. I give it back. It's yours to do with as you will. One more. Well, I got a couple scriptures I was going to read. Psalm 27, verse 14. Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and He will strengthen your heart. Wait, I say, on the Lord. Isaiah 40, verse 31. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. If we do things in God's time, we'll never run out of the energy we need to finish it. Because God will make it work. Our church, our little church there in Celebration in Ontario, we've been around for 40 some years and we've never had our own place. We've always rented. And the last few years we'd rent and then someone would sell and we'd have to move out. And we'd end up right now we're in the basement of a United Methodist church. They only use it on Sunday, so we get it at Sabbath, right? But we don't always get it. We get it, but we have to be out at a certain time. We can't store it. It's just about, 12 years ago or so, Dad started hanging out with the Ministerial Association in the area. And because there's some Seventh-day Adventists, but they don't hang out with anybody. So we're basically the only Sabbath church in the area. And so he's hanging out with all these, Sunday preachers. And at first there was this divide, Sunday versus Sabbath. And I hang out with the Gideons International, and the same thing happens, Sunday versus Sabbath. And I get a chance to actually go out and speak in churches on Sundays for the Gideons, telling about the work of the Gideons. So for years it was kind of, don't say anything about the Sabbath because they won't deal well with it. But we found over the last few years that's going away. The pastors Dad meets with, they are learning about the Sabbath. They're understanding the Sabbath. In fact, one of them was lamenting that his congregation would never let him speak about it. Of course, they're at the whim of their congregations, but they would like to. And we had a Sunday preacher one time. He actually came up and spoke at the feast one year. Dad invited him up. And he was going through all the beauty of the Feast of Tabernacles. He'd looked into it because of it. And he was finding all these wonderful things. He was glowing when he spoke about the wonder of the Feast of Tabernacles. And they're starting to learn about these things. And it's to the point now where there's no headbutting on it. We're Sabbath, they're Sunday, we're going to church. And they don't care. It's not that big of a deal. In fact, it's wonderful to them. So wonderful, in fact, that just before I came down here, I got a call. One of the Baptist churches had lost their minister, and they needed somebody to fill in. They were trying to work out spots. They asked if I'd preach, because they knew it wouldn't affect my going to church. I'd go to church, and then I'd come over there on Sunday. Well, that's interesting, because a few years ago, they'd have gone, well, we don't want any of those 7-day people in here. I went to a Nazarene church for the Gideons one year, or last year, a few months ago, this year, in McCall. And I was talking to someone who said, well, where do you go to church? And I told him, and we're a Sabbath-keeping church. And he goes, oh, wow, our drummer is a Seventh-day Adventist. And before they knew I was a Sabbath keeper, they were talking about the Sabbath and how there might be something to it in their little meeting that they had before, that the elders or whatever had before church. See, God's working it out. So we hadn't had our own building forever, and then we've been looking to buy the last couple of years. We've been trying, and I've been telling everybody, we can't do it. Nobody's going to finance us. But we still looked, and we tried, and there was one building in particular we kept trying to get, and nothing happened. And there's this other building we looked at, but it was way overpriced, and we couldn't do it. Well, all of a sudden, here comes this building that we couldn't do, and it was a lot lower price, and somebody had the money to give to us, so we could buy it. And so we bought a building, and we're working on it. And I'm supposed to be doing the electrical, but it's kind of hard from here. So eventually I'll be back, and hopefully they'll be almost done with it so we can move in pretty quick. But the thing is, we own our own building, and one of the pastors from one of the churches there in Ontario told Dad, he said, you need to put a sign out, coming soon, because the area needs a Sabbath church. They got Sunday churches. But we need to let people know that we're coming soon. God's timing. Because if we'd done this a few years ago, we'd have been butting heads with everybody. Now, they need us there. This is how God works things out. And it's His timing entirely that we had the money. So, everything, put it in God's hands. That's all I want to say here. All of your life, but especially your time. Let Him take care of it, because He will. He will do exactly what needs to be done, and He'll do it perfectly. It's His timing that matters. We met some of Wynn and Kim's. Who are Mackenzie and Farah?
Mackenzie's my granddaughter.
Okay.
Farah is my step.
Okay. And we met them yesterday, and they had just gone to a volleyball practice and all. And on the back of their volleyball uniforms is Hebrews 12, verse 1. And that's my penultimate scripture. I'm going to close with one other one, but let's read this one first. Hebrews 12, verse 1 and 2. Therefore we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us. Let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, who is the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before Him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. In everything we do, in our time, we need to look to Him. He is the goal. He's the end of the race. You keep your head up, you keep looking at that goal, you're going to get there faster. We need to make sure we're doing that, because He's the author and finisher of it all. He's the one that makes it all work together and work out. And James 5, verses 7 through 11. Just so we remember, it's God's timing that matters. Therefore, be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. So many people have set so many dates over the years, and calendars and times, and you know what? I didn't read the scriptures, but God said, even Jesus Himself, He said, I wrote it down here. Well, it doesn't matter where I wrote it down. Anyway, that He doesn't even know the time. That He's not. Oh, that's in Matthew 24. That the time and it's God who will know the end that comes. No one else knows. No one knows the day and the hour. Matthew 24:36. Knew it would come to my head if I thought about it long enough. So we don't know when the end is coming. You know what? It does not matter. It doesn't matter. Time does not matter. There says there in it, well, in many places, but Ephesians, where is that? Anyway, he says that one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day, that God is not slack concerning his promise, because time doesn't matter to God. He lives outside of it. Everybody wonder what happened before the earth was created? What time before the earth was created? He created time in Genesis 1. I mean, that's where he created the time. I don't know what happened, because how do you measure what's not there? And I contemplate I can think forward from a beginning to eternity. And that I can sort of contemplate. But when I try to think backward to no beginning, my brain starts going and heating up, and smoke starts coming out my ears. So I don't do that very often, because that's not good on the brain. So, the time all belongs to God. And he's going to work it out. So if the beginning belonged to him, the end does too. It all does. Let him do it when he wants to do it. Because he knows. He's not willing that any should perish, but that all come to a repentance. So he's going to do things when he wants to do them. For our sake. We learn to put ourselves in his hands. Things will work perfectly. I guarantee it. You lay it in God's timing. So James 5, to finish up, therefore be patient, brethren, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, waiting patiently for it until it receives the early and latter rain. My dad runs a greenhouse. It's been his dream all along, and he finally got it planted. He can't force those tomatoes to come up. He has to do everything in their time. And that's the way God invented it. That's the way he set it aside. And that's the way we are with everything we do. So that's the way we need to be patient. Like we can't force the garden to grow. We can't force God either. And if we're going to be patient for our garden and realize that when we're patient, we reap the benefit from it, do the same with God. Put time in his hands, and you will reap a benefit from it. You also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another, brethren, lest you be condemned. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. You think of Hebrews 11 and the great faith that all those people showed. They were looking forward to a time beyond their time, to a reward that they knew they weren't going to get at that point, but they knew they would get. That's putting time in God's hands. So be patient and look to the prophets who spoke as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. You've heard of the perseverance of Job. You've seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. Do you know what Job learned? Started with Job, I'll end with him. You know what he learned that we can learn? Through all the struggles and all the trials, this righteous man started out as a righteous man and ended up learning that his righteousness wasn't enough. He learned in chapter, 39? No, 40. I'll get there. (42). Job answered the Lord after God had stopped talking, and he said, I know that you can do everything, and that no purpose of yours can be withheld from you. So you asked when you started this, who is this who hides counsel without knowledge? So many times it's been me speaking what I didn't know. But he says, you told me to man up, so here I am. Listen, please, and speak. Let me speak. Verse 4, you said, I will question you. He said, be a man, I'll question you and you will answer me. So Job said, here I am answering you. Verse 5, this is what Job learned and what all of us can learn from this. He said, I've heard of you. by the hearing of the ear. He'd spoken of God by the word of his mouth, by the hearing of his ear. He said, I have heard of you from my ear, but now that I've learned who you are, now that I've learned to put my time in your hands, that's all Job had left was time. And he learned to put it in God's hands. He said, now that I've learned that, I had heard of you, but now my eye sees you. This is what we learn. When we put God first, when we put his timing ahead of ours, we will see God.